Hi, everybody. We're going to talk about India. It's a very small country with a couple of people in it. So I'll start off just right off the bat. Does anybody already have games deployed in India? No, so you're coming in fresh. Fantastic. Okay, so India. India is a very small country with a couple of small handsets with a couple of people playing games. Hi, I'm Scott. So I've been in mobile, I've been in gaming for almost 17 years. I was back in PC when China came online. So I saw a lot of really, really exciting advancements in technology and growth when China came online. The parallels between China in 2004 and India now are unbelievable as far as handset penetration, as far as engagement times. The amount of time that people are spending in games is remarkably similar. And I'm here to tell you why. If you don't have an India strategy, you need to have an India strategy. India. Why? Everybody, if you've been in mobile for a while, you're probably thinking, India, great, there's a lot of people there, but I don't really know anything much more about it. So I'm going to be very, very quick. We're running low on time, so I'll blow through this very quickly. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to come grab me afterwards. This is a subject I'm kind of passionate about. I've been doing India for about 5 years now. I saw, like I said, when China came online, I saw a lot of developers that said, hey, we missed this boat. We missed the chance to really get in early in China and really get in, and when the audience was fresh. I want to make sure people don't miss India. India. Why India? The first one is growth. And growth is at a scale in India that just is unprecedented. You don't see the kind of growth that we're seeing in India today that you see anywhere else in the world. There's 1.3 billion people in India. That number is second only to China. And China right now has 1.38 billion. India has 1.31 billion. So they're about 700 million people behind. They're actually expecting that India is going to overtake China in about 3 years as far as population. I'm sorry, by 2024. So I was a little off. Mobile only has replaced mobile first. Consoles really don't exist. Tablets don't really exist. PC, people that play on PC, most of the people that I've talked to, it's their work machine. If they want a game, they game on their mobile. And this is pretty easy. About 77% of people in India right now have a mobile subscription. And I'm going to put a big caveat on this. Just because they have a mobile subscription does not mean they have a smartphone. It means they have a connection to the outside world. 77%, that's about 1 billion people right now that are connected. Of that 1 billion people, about 387 million of them are on smart devices. To put that in perspective again, that's about how many people we have here in the United States. They have their population on smart devices in India, actively using them. And for most of these people, this is their connectivity to the outside world. So their banking, their entertainment, their communication, all of it runs through the same device. This also has been growing as far as the number of devices have been growing steadily over the last couple of years. In 2016, that actually grew about 20%. And to put it in perspective, the mobile market grew about 3%. So again, 18 versus 3. We're just talking about growth. It's an unbelievable amount of growth that I don't think we'll ever see again. This number of 387 is expected to jump to over 550 million by the end of 2020. So you're talking about another 120 million smartphones being put into market in the next year or so. Again, if you're making a game, if you're making an app, could you use an extra 150 million people in your app? If the answer is no, what are you doing here? But if the answer is yes, then look to India. It's still an unbelievable growth market. And again, the last piece I think is the most important is if you're a game developer, this is where people play their games in India. You're not fighting with consoles, you're not fighting with PCs, you're fighting with the person sitting next to you. Youth is king, and the more I dig into this in India, the more it boggles my mind. 1 out of every 10 people on the planet Earth is an Indian under 35. So again, we look around this conference, 1 out of every 10 is going to be somebody that's an Indian. The median age in India is 27. If you think about what you were doing at 27, you probably were out of university, you got your first job, you've got a little bit of disposable income, you maybe got your first nice new smartphone, you're probably going to engage with it. Again, the time is right for people to have disposable income, to have a device, and to be gaming. The last piece I'm going to mention on this is half of their population is under 25. So again, 1.3 billion people, half of them are under 25. That means that there's a lot of growth ahead of it for a region. A lot of people are going to be playing your game for the next 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, hopefully beyond that. 2/3 of the population is under 35. Again, if you're making a game that's going to have a long tail to it, India is a great place to kind of keep your players and keep them active. Everybody knows, if you've been watching download charts, India is kind of a monster when it comes to downloads. About 58%, 59% of the downloads in the world in 2017 occurred in this one region. And a large majority of that is games. And not only are they downloading a huge number of games, but they're also engaging with them and staying engaged with them. So typically on gaming, most of these players are playing for more than 60 minutes a month, or I'm sorry, over 60 minutes a week, and they're engaging with about 1/3 of them. And I'll touch a little bit on engagement and monetization a little bit later. But the last piece, again, is the usage is through the roof. Indians spent about 50 billion hours in apps last year. 50 billion. That's a massive, massive number. And again, if you always say we want to capture 1% of that market, that's a good market to capture 1% of. The last piece I'll mention on here is mobile traffic represents about 80% of the traffic that's coming out of their web traffic. So again, PCs just don't really exist. Tablets just don't really exist. Mobile is king. Mobile is really everything. What's driving these? And I kind of touched on these a little bit. Massive, massive, massive increase in internet availability. Right now, as we mentioned earlier, there's about a billion people on mobile subscriptions. Right now, only about 33% of the market has internet connectivity. So people will have a subscription. Again, that can make a phone call, but you're not going to get connected to the internet. Why is this important? This number is expected to jump to 53% by the next 3 years. So if you can imagine, all of a sudden you have a billion people and you're adding another 20% in over the next 3 years, that number is going to get enormous. And I'll give you a quick comparison. As far as internet availability, look at some of the other big markets. South Korea is at 88%. Japan's about 83%. Hong Kong's about 81%. The United States is about 75%. So we're comparing 75% penetration versus 22%. You guys can start to see why I get excited about this region. There's just such a massive group of people that haven't come online yet and are going to be anxious for content. Data costs. I laugh every time I go to India. I could get a subscription in India. That would be my internet connectivity. I could pay roaming charges, and it would be cheaper than what I pay here for less. A good example is what used to pay for 1 gigabyte of data is now you get 60 gigabytes of data. A lot of these carriers, Jio's a big famous one, they made an enormous bet where they just said, hey, if we give everybody really, really cheap handsets and we give them free data every day, they'll start to develop a pattern of using this. Right now you get a gigabyte of data every day just to use. If you don't use it, it goes away tomorrow, you get another gigabyte. Versus my plan here in the US where I get 7 gigs for a month, it stinks, and I'm paying 30x what I would be there in India. You can imagine, again, all of a sudden you're 27 years old, you have internet connectivity, you have data that if you don't use it, it just goes away. Why not? Let's go for it. Touched on this a little bit earlier. Massive increase in disposable income. People are starting to get out of university, they've got their first job, they've got a little bit of spending cash. This number actually is a 1.6 increase year over year to about $3.7 billion. So just the ability for somebody to buy is growing dramatically. Maturation of talent. Everybody, in the years past, if you needed services, if you needed QA, if you needed to outsource something to India, you'd send it to India. That was fantastic. These shops now were spending all this time, they started out doing QA, then they went to localization, then they went to back end. Now all of that is fully matured and they're building their own studios, they're building their own content. And why this is important is local content is always going to be key. Last one, digital wallets, and I'll go off on a very quick story. There was an event that occurred in India. It was called demonetization, and the closest I can explain this to you is if you get on a plane and you flew to New York. When you got off the plane, they said, "Oh, by the way, if you have a $100 bill in your pocket or a $50 bill in your pocket, that's not worth anything anymore. It's just garbage. You can throw it away." So much so that when this event occurred, and it literally happened overnight, people were out burning cash out in their front yards because it wasn't worth anything. If they deposited into a bank, they'd have to pay taxes on it. So they just said, we'll just burn the cash. Insane. But as a result, digital wallets got huge. One of my favorite stories is a company called Paytm. Paytm was you could fill up your account, you could send a text message, you could accept currency that way. Paytm launched in 2010. They grew up to about 11 million users, kind of no big deal. This demonetization event occurred in August 2014. You can imagine what happened overnight. They're expected to hit over 300 million users by 2020. So they went from 11 million users to 104 million users in about 60 days. Again, talking about scale. If you guys were launching a game and you went from 11,000 users to 11 million users, you'd probably be very happy. These kind of things can still happen in India. Again, why are we all here? Gaming. Why is this all? Who cares? There's a lot of people. Great. What does this have to do with gaming? Lots and lots and lots of gamers. If your only device that you have in your pocket is the same one that you use for banking, that you use for communication, you're going to value that tool. But if it also can provide you super, super inexpensive entertainment, how many of us have sat and watched YouTube while we're waiting for our plane? Now imagine that for 250 million people. And they're all trying to find something to play. Indian gamers spend about 15% of their device spending online just playing games. So you figure 15% of your day is dedicated to playing a game. That's dramatically higher than what we have here. And I'd like to point out this number is actually additive. So they're not taking anything away. You're not taking away from your YouTube time. You're not taking away from time spent with family or work. This is just purely you found another 15% of your day to play a game. And I'll just touch on this real quickly. PUBG was a ridiculous phenomenon in India. We asked about 1,000 players, do you play PUBG? Do you know PUBG? About 62% of the people responded and said, yeah, absolutely, I play. And what's more exciting is about 25% of them said, yeah, I play for more than 8 hours a week. So almost a full work day I spend just playing PUBG. And I think what's most exciting about this in India is about a third of them, 11%, a third of them said we do spend money on this on a weekly basis, and 11% of them, they said they spent more than about $20 a month, which for India is a big deal. It shows the LTV is going up dramatically. Growth in market. Again, I touched on this a little bit. 89% of all gaming revenue in India came from a mobile device. 90%. 90% of what was spent on a device was a game. That's huge. On a mobile. There's no consoles, no PCs. It's all going to what you guys are working on today. The other piece I'll touch on here, again, is if you're developing a game and you want to get user feedback, user acquisition in India is still incredibly affordable. If you go to the UK and you try and acquire a user, you're spending about $1.70. If you come to the US, it's about $2.20, and this is a blended rate. In India, you can get that down to about 16 cents. So you can either get 100 users or you can get one. If you're testing out your game, you want to get some eyeballs, you want to get features, you want to understand how people are using your content, India is a great, great place for this. Regionalization, that end should be there. Regionalization of distribution. This goes back to Google Play and Apple. Google Play is dominant. I mean, the Google represents 96, 97% of the market in India. And what India is starting to do is it's always been a market that's been traditionally difficult to monetize. Google Play is doing an amazing job of putting stuff like Paytm, engaging with them there, doing scratch cards, enabling, credit, things of that nature, things that can get people that are used to spending money in a certain way, enabling them to spend that money in that same way, but now into your game. Last one is just the evolution of the mindset. people will just keep playing games. They're playing more and more games. As you know, what we're hearing from Google is devices are actually churning around every 8 months. Indian consumers are acquiring a new device. What that means for you is you're not worried about having to support older legacy handsets. Those are going out of market very, very rapidly. Here in the US, that number as far as how quickly we're upgrading devices is actually lengthening out. In India, it's going the other direction. So most devices now are going to be 2 gigabytes of RAM, have a very fast internet connectivity, very nice screen, and usually it's significantly cheaper than here in the US. The other thing I'd like to touch on here is free-to-play versus paid. Paid doesn't exist in India, just doesn't. Free-to-play is the only way to go. Ad-supported is still huge. It usually represents about 75% of your revenue in India. I think one of the top, we looked at the top 100 freemium or free-to-play games, and we compared them to the top 100 premium games. It was about 22x the revenue on free-to-play. There's just a massive, massive push into free-to-play. And the reason for this is just mindset. I think most of the Indian game players that I've talked with, they say, we expect value. We're not going to pay money in for something that we don't understand the value, or we think we can get it for free. In an Android marketplace where there is some piracy, that's a concern. I threw this slide in because I wanted to talk about monetization. We talked about kind of, another 22% of players coming online. If we're at 250 million gamers now, this number is expected to jump over 350 million in the next 3 years. Why this number is important is this is the growth rate year over year of how people spend. China, 3% increase. Great. 3% is nice. US, 1%. Who cares? Basically flat. India, 75%. That number continues to grow. Year over year, people are spending more and more every year. And the reason for that is disposable income, ease of purchase, and frankly, the games are getting better. The games that are coming into India now are going to be more, we call them global games. So they're going to have multiplayer, they're going to have cohorts, they're going to have live ops, they're going to have long legs on their games. And so people will continue to spend. This number, I think, will continue to grow. I put Indonesia up here to give you an example, because in the next slide you'll see why this is important. If this number becomes this number, this is where the market's going to go. Right now we're at 2.4 forecasted, and I think this number is actually a little bit low. Again, a simple jump in LTV from $23 a user to $50 a user, that's a jump. But it's not an unrealistic jump. It's not out of the realm of possibility. And all of a sudden, just because of the number of people in here, $5.2 billion. I mean, that's just a massive, massive number. Self-promotion, it's shameless. If you have users in India, if you have a game that has a user base in India and you're not monetizing it, if your LTV for any of your users in India is low, come talk to me. We work with a ton of developers, and what we do is we call it regionalization. We'll take a look at your game, we'll say, here's the things we think need to change if you want to engage in it with a user in India better. We'll work with you guys and make it work. Shameless, but I think it's worth your time. Again, if this number becomes this number, wouldn't you rather be ahead of it versus behind it? I think it's worth the call. It's worth a conversation. Questions?
You have no time.
I'm 2 minutes over, so come find me afterwards.